Welcome to the Section 111 podcast with your host, TJ Shoemaker.
And welcome to another edition of the Section 111 podcast. I'm your host, TJ Shoemaker, and I've got a very special guest with me today. I've got Alex Turko from the Sports Bar podcast. Alex, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, TJ. I'm, coming off a bye week here as an FSU fan, so I got to soak in everything in the college football landscape, and I'm excited to be on your show.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad that you guys were able to get the win this past weekend against Bye.
Yeah, it was a closer game than you think.
I think that Willie's players were a little bit more hydrated this week, but so that was important for their preparation.
Yeah, well, he's certainly stumbled through some interviews leading up to it, so he's all rested up, ready to go for Clemson, which. I'm sure we'll dive into it a little bit as we move forward, but a game that almost doesn't mean much for the Noles moving forward.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll definitely get into it. But kind of starting out, I wanted to ask you about Willie Taggart. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts and opinions on him and the program moving forward.
Well, obviously he's been disappointing, and a lot of that is, it's such a tight woven web or story, if you will, on why it's been so disappointing. A little bit of it is because he came in, took the job, and set expectations so high right away using, let's do something, lethal simplicity, just basically saying the cupboard's so full here, he's never had talent like this. I'm going to walk in and win, 9 games right off the bat. So everyone's expectations were so high, even though it was unrealistic because Jimbo, another part of that story there is Jimbo Fisher left us high and dry and in the middle of a season stopped recruiting. And I know that's been well documented, so I won't touch on all of that. But, there really were a lot of factors that have set Willie's ability to come in here and win further back than they should be.
Yeah, definitely. And before we came on, you and I were kind of talking about the offensive line as a unit and how they've struggled not only this season but last season also. So, what are your thoughts on the offensive line, and what do you think that they need to do moving forward to improve?
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling that FSU, a caliber school like we have, and like you said, we were just talking about it, just casual conversation, what's going on with the O-line, and talking about how talented our running backs and receivers are, but we don't get to see that quite to the ability that they could be, because the offensive line has been so bad. And truthfully, since 2013, FSU's offensive line has been terrible. So the biggest issue is we can't recruit them, and we can't get them on campus. And then if we do get 1 or 2 guys here or there, they either aren't developed, they get injured, and that comes down to coaching, the development. And then, we had a stud, Landon Dickerson, at Florida State, and then he goes and transfers to Alabama because we were forcing him to play tackle, and he knows his money or bread is going to be buttered at the NFL level playing guard. And it's just like, I don't care if this is going to help the team. If this kid is so dead set on playing guard and he's our best O-lineman, let him play guard.
Exactly.
So there's been a lot of frustration there on the offensive line, and not having a great quarterback even highlights that a little bit more because the offensive line can't help him out. So it'd be nice if we had Jameis Winston back there still, or a quarterback that can dissect a defense a little quicker. But that offensive line's really been a Achilles heel for us.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the offensive line recruiting hasn't been great and the development. And then you mentioned quarterback. Willie Taggart has kind of struggled to even get his guy at quarterback the first 2 recruiting cycles. What do you think is the biggest issue with what's going on with the quarterback recruiting?
Yeah, that's been really odd too, being an offensive guy and an ace recruiter. Like he's, his resume does show he's a hell of a recruiter, but he hasn't been able to get that quarterback. And it's I don't know, it's kind of frustrating. We did have some guys last year on the team to where we took in 2 grad transfers, so you didn't feel like it was as dire that he missed on some guys last year. But they have put their eggs all in on some guys and struck out, and it just seemed like poor strategy there. And that's another thing, going back to the overarching theme here of Willie Taggart. What do you think about him? It's like, I think the guy's a little bit in over his head. And it's not to say he won't eventually right the ship. I don't have a ton of confidence that will happen. But at the same time, I do think he stepped in and just kind of thought, hey, I've been doing this. And once I put a sphere helmet on the sideline, I'm going to be even better than I was. And I think it was a wake-up call and pretty humbling for him that it's not that easy.
Yeah, definitely. And, in his first 2 years, he's 8-9 as a head coach. And while on the surface, that may seem like not good, which I mean, it's not great, obviously not up to the standards of Florida State football. But
Right.
you and I kind of talked about it a little bit before we came on, and we were talking about second-year head coaches. And, there really hasn't been a whole lot of success among them, except for Dan Mullen at Florida, who's 16-3. But then you've got the likes of Scott Frost, who was known.
Subtle drop in there, TJ. Subtle drop with the Florida
Yeah,
record.
I was hoping you weren't going to catch that, but
Hey, but good for you guys. I'd trade places any day.
yeah, for sure. But with Scott Frost, he was known for winning at UCF and everything, and had his biggest jump, I guess, in year 2 at UCF. But here we are, year 2 at Nebraska, and he's 8-10 overall in his first 2 years, and he's kind of struggling a little bit. And then you've got Jeremy Pruitt, who's 6-11 in his first 2 years, and just not a whole lot of success among those second-year coaches. So,
Yeah.
Looking at it, Taggart's actually doing well, comparing him to the other second-year coaches. But like I said earlier, overall, it's just that's not going to get it done at a place like Florida State, and that's why you're also starting to see some of these other coaches get on the hot seat as well. I know Jeremy Pruitt's definitely right there with Taggart as far as being mentioned for having the biggest dumpster fire in college football. But
Yeah.
I think that Taggart has the ability to get things turned around as far as recruiting goes. I mean, I think he is a guy that can relate to players and that type of thing. But where he's going to need to have the most improvement is in his development within the program and trying to change the culture, because I feel like that's the biggest issue right now. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, it comes, like you said, it comes back to culture, getting Taggart's guys in there. And if I take it back to, I hate beating dead horse, but taking it back to Jimbo Fisher, I mean, we had one of the lowest APR scores with the academics. So there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for Taggart just to off people. We couldn't just get rid of some of the bad eggs. And a lot of people don't realize that. And on top of that, I mean, a lot of these young guys that are changing the culture are guys that are starting to make an impact on the team. I know it took a little bit of time for Cam Akers even to buy in.
Right.
Because he came in and was sold a dream. And then last year we were so bad, I think it was hard to, mentally buy in on that. And we've got some fresh blood in there at offensive coordinator with Kendall Briles, and I think that's helped a lot. But going back to the other coaches who are his peers at this point, Dan Mullen, of course, is exceeding all expectations. Maybe not, but definitely the leader of that pack that you named. I mean, Chip Kelly's not doing anything. Scott Frost isn't doing anything. Jeremy Pruitt's not doing anything. But for some reason, Taggart gets the most heat. So it is frustrating in that sense. And I'm not pleased with the product on the field, but it is odd that, Florida State's catching the most heat and being associated with being even like you said, dumpster fire.
Right.
When a lot of these other programs aren't succeeding either. And part of that, again, is Scott Frost came in and one of his opening press conference basically said, hey, I want y'all to know it's going to get worse before it gets better. And setting that expectation is so important because people kind of understood there was a big rebuild to do there. Whereas Willie Taggart, again, came in and sold us a dream.
Yeah, definitely. And Chip Kelly's record, I forgot to mention him earlier. He's actually 4-14 so far in his
Is he?
first
I was
in
going to
his
ask you
first
because
2
I don't
years.
have
Yeah.
it offhand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
actually
he's a,
memorized
yeah.
all that. I don't even have it in front of me. I memorized it.
Good.
So
Well, I wanted to ask you that, so I'm happy to hear that because I'm not by any means pleased with an 8-9 record, and we lost some games that we should have won, but we also snuck by a couple games last year. If you want to, you can't really give Taggart any extra wins than he has. He had to fight for almost all of them. So, but yeah, looking at Chip Kelly, Jeremy Pruitt, I mean, these guys are struggling too. So it's unfortunately a tough time for these second year guys.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, so I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want you to just kind of finish it for me, okay?
Oh man, these are tough.
All right. So Willie Taggart survives the season if.
I'll be honest, I don't think there's a scenario at this point, the way things are starting to look and the way his record, going at least being 3-2 here at this point.
Uh-huh.
I don't think there's a scenario that he gets fired this year at FSU, mainly because we can't afford it. I mean, we have a interim AD, athletic director, so it's going to be a hard sell to get a new coach to come in and work for a guy that they don't know who their boss is going to be. And frankly, our boosters don't have the money just to buy him out. So I don't think there's a scenario. Now, granted, if he loses every game, I guess then I'd have to say, it's time. I might even start pitching in some dollars. But I think it'd be really hard pressed to see him go after this year. Next year, all bets are off. The buyout will be lowered, and I think we're going to have to wait out this 3-year contract in full and go from there.
Yeah, that was going to be the next thing I was going to ask you about was the buyout, because I know that it is a lot of money. I want to say it's like 17 million. You might be able to.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head. I thought it's definitely over 10. I knew it was around. For some reason, I wanted to say 13, but don't hold me to that. I don't. But you're right. I mean, it's enough to where we're not pitching it over.
Right. Either way, that's a lot of money. But
yeah.
So if they say they end up not making a bowl game for the second consecutive year, do you see them, definitely considering it at that point, or is it just kind of they're just going to ride it out kind of no matter what?
That is going to be the worst case scenario, because I really think we're going to be so stuck with him and backed into a corner where everyone knows he's a dead man walking, which will kill us with recruiting, and everything else that you can name. It's going to kill the culture that he's attempted to start building and you start to see a little bit of. But I don't think the money would be there. And if it does, I think if he misses a bowl, you got to find a way to get some people to pitch in some money, and some boosters might come out of the woodworks there. And if that money's there, I think he would be gone if we don't make a bowl. But I think the money'd have to be there first, because we've had such a deficit on the athletic, budget.
Yeah, and I was actually before we came on, or before you and I even started talking, I was looking at their schedule coming up, and they've got at Clemson this week, at Wake Forest the following week, and then I think it's Syracuse, Miami, at Boston College. I think a very winnable game against like Alcorn State or something like that.
Yeah,
and then
I think
then they play
Alabama
State, and then they finish at Florida.
Yeah,
I was looking at that, trying to look at it from a non-Florida fan perspective and everything, and the two. I feel like there are 2 losses there for sure, and that's, to me, that's Clemson and Florida.
Yep.
Other than that, I think that they have the potential to win those games, but it's like, will they? At Wake Forest is going to be a tricky game. I think that they're obviously a more talented team than Wake Forest, but Wake Forest is probably playing the best football that they've played in years this year.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a tricky game, and I can't remember exactly which games I had in my head, them winning and losing, but I feel like at best, I think they're going to go like 7-5 at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Four more wins out of the next 7 games. I feel like 7-5 is probably their ceiling, and then I even think that I had them right there at like 6-6. So I mean
Yeah.
that is a bowl game and everything. So I mean Willie might be able to survive just by going 6-6 this year.
Yeah, and how those look will be big too. I mean, like you
Oh,
mentioned,
definitely.
We have Miami, Florida, and Clemson. If you can hang with Florida, not win, not 7 point, not lose by a field goal, you can lose by 10. It's all about how it looks. If we're in that game late and we lose, that's okay. And then Clemson this week, we're 27-point dogs right now. If we keep that reasonable, say we lose by 20, but we're somewhat in the game at points.
Right.
These are steps to build confidence. And right now that's the key, because that schedule that you just highlighted, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not putting lipstick on a pig here. The ACC sucks, man. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
they're
sure.
terrible. So it's perfect for us. The way it sets up is the ACC does stink. Our schedule is terrible remaining strength of schedule wise. So if we lose to Clemson and Florida as projected, you got to remember, Miami doesn't look good now, but last year we should have beat them. We were up 28-3, I believe.
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in Miami, so we get them at home this year, and then Wake Forest is probably our toughest game remaining in that slate, and we're playing them in Winston-Salem at 7:30. But that's not home field advantage. I mean, come on, we're Florida State. We shouldn't be scared of that. So
Right.
I'm with you there. I think 7 wins is very realistic at this point, and that's not a great season, but
Right.
God, it's a step in the right direction.
Oh, for sure, definitely. That's where I was going to go. It's progress, right? I mean, look at last year, going 5-7, not reaching a bowl game for the first time in how long? I don't even know the.
Yeah,
I mean, a long
30,
time,
40
long,
years.
long
Yeah,
time, yeah. And I mean, winning 2 more games. I mean, maybe next year it's 2 more games. It's
yeah.
definitely a step in the right direction, and
Something to sell the kids, something to sell an image, a substantial stat that you can say, hey, listen, we were down in the dumps, but look, we're climbing out of the hole. And that's the key. You got to do that. And it's all about recruiting. Everyone knows that's the name of the game. So if you can start selling some kids on a vision and seeing the steps in the right direction, it will really help the program and maybe build a little off-season momentum, putting a bowl win in there.
yeah, definitely. So, kind of moving on a little bit to a broader perspective on the national stage, I want to talk to you about the top 4 teams in the country and who do you think right now those 4 teams are, and who might you project being there at the end to actually make the college football playoff?
Yeah. Well, this year's been a lot of fun for me because Florida State's been disappointing, kind of came out of the gates that way. So I've been very focused, as I always am, but even more so on the national stage. And there are a lot of teams that are good this year. And really not one team to me seems invincible. Last year we knew it was Clemson and Bama. And this year I still have them in my top 4, and I'll give that to you here in a second. But
Okay.
there are a lot of teams that are knocking on that door. I personally have Bama at number 1, Clemson number 2, not based on what I've seen, but you can't. I mean, they are the defending champs and they're extra talented. We know that. So I'm not going to penalize them too much because they haven't looked spectacular. And then my number 3 is Ohio State, personally. I really like the Buckeyes this year. I really like Justin Fields. I think he's a stud. And then number 4, I have Georgia, another team that hasn't overly impressed me. I was tempted to put Oklahoma in there, but they haven't really played anyone until this weekend when they face off against Texas. So I had to give the Dogs a little bit of credit.
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of right there with you with the top 4, except maybe a little bit different order.
Uh-huh.
And number 1 is kind of interchangeable for me. I think right now I could go Alabama or Ohio State at number 1, and I mean
Yeah, I
you can
think
make
that's fair too.
you can make the argument for either one.
Mm-hmm.
And like two through 4, I also feel like, or three and 4, I should say, is pretty up in the air at this point. I think that it's right now it's LSU, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Those 3 teams are kind of fighting for the other 2 spots. And
Yeah.
right now I would leave Clemson out of it right now. as far as the product that we've seen this year, and
Yeah.
they've struggled with a team in North Carolina that they should never struggle with, and even in the bigger wins like the first game of the season against Georgia Tech, they, other than Travis Etienne, they really were not very impressive to me, especially Trevor
Yeah.
Lawrence. And we'll get to that here in a minute, but I mean, my top four is probably Alabama, Ohio State. I would have LSU in there at the moment. I know that that's going to shake itself out maybe this weekend with the matchup with
Yeah.
Florida. But I think the LSU's in there. And then I would probably go Oklahoma at 4.
Yeah, I think that's a good looking top four. And like I said, you even said the word interchangeable. I mean, your argument's as fair as anyone's. Clemson hasn't proven they are that same team, but Oklahoma, they look great. I mean, they just haven't played anyone for me yet, but
Right.
they're all right there. I mean, there's a bunch of teams knocking on the outside looking in, LSU being one. Hey, if Texas wins this weekend, their one loss is LSU. I mean, they're
Yeah.
going to be close to that top 5. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
And that I don't think, and right now I don't think Florida's in that conversation. So I'm not going to play Homer at all and think that Florida's in that conversation right now. But
yeah,
if they do go into Baton Rouge this weekend and get a win or even a very close loss, I think that they, at that point, they kind of still control their own destiny as far as if they beat Georgia down the road. And I mean, they would have a chance to, if they beat Georgia, I think they're in the SEC championship. So
yep,
I mean, they would have a chance to possibly, probably have to play Alabama or LSU. But I mean, if they would lose to LSU in a tight one and then win out, I think that they're a team that could possibly, be there in contention at the end. But I mean, you could say that about a lot of teams at this point. So I'm not gonna jump the gun and tell everybody that Florida's a playoff team, because that's not what I'm saying at all.
Well, I'm
But
excited to see how it all shakes out, because I mean, there's all these teams have so much left to prove, so much left on the bone to chew. I mean, freaking Wisconsin sitting here probably screaming for some respect, and no one's giving it to them after they stomped Michigan, but they can prove their own destiny. They play Ohio State at the end of the year. So I mean, there's a lot of good teams out there this year, and Florida, as much as I hate to say it, I totally agree with you, TJ. It's if they win this weekend in Baton Rouge or keep it close and then win out, I mean, we're talking about a SEC title game appearance, and then playing a Bama team that has looked beatable this year because their defense is so riddled with injury.
Right. Yeah, right now, I mean, you're kind of seeing Alabama's offense kind of carry the load for them, and right now they look pretty unstoppable. So I think it's, in the end, I think, however it shakes out, I think Alabama and Ohio State are both going to be there. And
Yep.
I think that could be the national championship just off of what we know right now. Obviously that's going
Yeah.
to change, and, things might happen. But right now, my national championship would be Alabama and Ohio State, and that would be one heck of a matchup.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually see the same thing right now. I mean, those are my top 4 teams. I have Clemson at 2 now, just out of respect, but I have Ohio State 3. So there's no doubt in my mind you could see that one shake out like that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we kind of mentioned Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence both earlier. I wanted to get your take on both of those guys, and I have a really interesting question for you. And
Okay.
do you think that Justin Fields right now is going to be, I won't say right now, do you think Justin Fields is going to be a better pro prospect than Trevor Lawrence?
Pro prospect is such a hard conversation, because you know how those scouts get enamored with an extra inch in height or an extra tick on the 40 or an extra, millimeter in hand size. But just passing my eye test, I mean, what do I know? I like Fields better right now. I think he goes through progressions noticeably better. Lawrence this year has 5 interceptions already. Last year he had 4 in the entire season. So he's doing a lot of forcing, and he locks in on his targets. But, every time I start to doubt Lawrence, you got to remember what he did against Alabama last year. So that does still carry water, and I'm by no means saying Lawrence isn't a good quarterback. I'm sure
Right.
you're right. Yeah, I'm sure you're right there with me. But I really like what I've seen from Fields. I mean, he's got a body that looks like an NFL QB, can take a couple hits, and the guy slings it.
Yeah, he can throw it effortlessly, and accurate, and he's been money up to this point. And I'm going to agree with you and say that Justin Fields is a better pro prospect right now and moving forward than Trevor Lawrence, mainly because I feel like, you're seeing what Ohio State's asking Justin Fields to do. He's having no problems at all with it. And I think part of Trevor Lawrence's struggles have been they're asking him to do a little bit too much than what he can handle at this point. And that's not saying that later on that he's not going to be an amazing quarterback, because I think he has that potential to be like a Peyton Manning type guy with a little bit better mobility than Peyton, obviously. But I think that last year, I think Trevor Lawrence's success was kind of contingent on what they were asking him to do, and they were just basically asking him to be a game manager. And then this year, they're kind of putting the ball in his hands a little bit more and asking him to make quicker and more decisions. And I think he's having a little bit of a time with it. And I think that Ryan Day and Ohio State's just throwing whatever they want at Justin Fields, and he's just taking it and running. So right now, I kind of compare Justin Fields a little bit to like a Russell Wilson, and I think that is going to intrigue a lot of NFL coaches and scouts. And
yeah,
I still think that Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be a top 3 pick, in not this year's draft but next year's draft when he's eligible. And
right.
I think that Justin Fields might be that guy out of that class that really blossoms in the NFL and might be the best actual prospect and become the best NFL quarterback out of that entire class. So the jury's still out. I'm not ready to say that for sure, but as of right now, that's how I feel about Justin Fields. I think that he's doing a phenomenal job for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and what's fun about the conversation is we get to have it all again next year, because like you mentioned, they're both coming back. Lawrence will be back at Clemson. Fields will have to return as a junior over at Ohio State.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you have any concerns with Trevor Lawrence right now? You mentioned that he has already thrown more interceptions this season than he did all of last season. But do you have any concerns?
Yeah, it is a red flag for me. This whole Clemson team to me, and maybe you'll agree, but 2014 Florida State, do you recall, every first half we would be losing to an inferior opponent, and then in the second half we had Jameis Winston in his redshirt sophomore year following the national title. We returned everybody, and it was like, okay, second half comes around. All right, guys, let's turn it on and go win this game. And then we would turn it on. You'd see that old Jameis. You'd see that old spark, and we'd, squeak out a victory no matter who it was against, until we ended up playing Oregon, obviously, in the Rose Bowl. But Jameis that year threw a lot of interceptions, and he was forcing the ball, not having Kelvin Benjamin. He was now forcing the ball to Nick O'Leary, Rashad Green. I think we're seeing Trevor Lawrence do a similar thing as far as forcing the ball to these receivers on the outside, T. Higgins and Justin Ross, and you don't see him working it along the middle as much. They haven't really had a tight end step up quite like you would think they would. And then I think they go away from ETN a little bit too much, because I think ETN's a stud.
Absolutely.
And Lawrence is forcing the ball a lot. So to answer your question, yeah, it is a little bit of a red flag to me that he is having this much trouble with all that talent around him as far as not turning the ball over.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a red flag for me also, and mainly due to the level of competition that he's played so far this year. I don't feel like
That's a good point.
He hasn't played anybody that is like a top 10, top 15 defense, and he's still struggling with decision making and everything. And so it is a little bit of a red flag, but I think maybe that's just him playing a little bit loose, knowing that, hey, we are playing an inferior team. So, Alex, while we're talking about Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, let's kind of get into some Heisman talk. And I wanted to ask you about who you have as your Heisman front runner going into Week 7.
Yeah, the Heisman list this year is loaded. We talked about how top-heavy the NCAA rankings are this year. The whole top 10 is full of good players and good teams. But, this list has Fields, Hurts, Burrow, Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin. But my leader is Tua. A lot of people are giving him, a lot of credit that he does deserve. But he, at the same time, almost feels like he's not talked about as much as like a Lawrence or a Fields even. But Tua has 23 touchdowns this year and 0 interceptions. So right now he's my leader in the clubhouse for the Heisman.
Yeah, he's been fantastic, and I think a little bit of that, him not getting as much talk and spotlight is probably due to, he did this last year, like he's used to this, and at one point, it was kind of believed that it was going to be his. So I think due to him, kind of getting that recognition last year, I think it has died down this year just because the expectations for him are so high, and but then you look at a guy like like Joe Burrow that's kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, he had a pretty good season last year, but this year he's thrown 4 and 5 touchdowns a game, and he's getting a lot of the hype. So I'm kind of right there with you with saying that Tua is either at the top or near the top. I'm actually going to go with Jalen Hurts as my number one right now. I mean, what he's been able to do so far coming into a new system has been impressive so far. But yeah, I mean, I think all those guys that you mentioned are probably going to be headed to New York in December. Jonathan Taylor, Justin Fields, possibly Trevor Lawrence if he can get back into it. But yeah, I'm going to go with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts has been so fun to watch. He might be my favorite guy to watch of that list. I mean, he's got 500 rushing yards on top of I don't have the stat in front of me, but on top of how well he's throwing the football, I do know he only has 2 interceptions this year, so he's also taking care of the football, which is a huge plus here for quarterbacks.
Absolutely, and he actually has about, I think it's around 1,500 passing yards and then the 500 rushing yards, and he's got 21 or 22 total touchdowns on the season. So, and they've already had their bye week, so they've actually played one less game than most of the other Heisman contenders and everything. So what he's done has been very impressive, and I think if Oklahoma runs the table and he keeps doing what he's doing, I think that I don't know that you can give it to someone else. And it's crazy to think that Lincoln Riley might be, crowning his 3rd straight Heisman Trophy winner. And that's just amazing.
I know. And what a story that would be if that is the case. Let's say it does come down to Jalen Hurts and Tua. I mean, those two were splitting time just last year at Alabama, and in the whole controversy there for the past 2 seasons of those 2 quarterbacks. And then, like you said, to add to the story, Hurts becoming another Heisman Trophy winner on the resume for Lincoln Riley. It'd be absurd if he could do that.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with Trevor Lawrence and basically just what he's asked to do. I think that at Alabama, Jalen Hurts wasn't necessarily asked to do a whole lot. I think he did a great job of managing the offense and everything. And with Tua, they were able to open it up a little bit. But I mean, you're seeing that Jalen Hurts has that same ability at Oklahoma, and Lincoln Riley has done wonders with him, especially in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to look like any quarterback that goes into that system is going to just turn in and just blossom and turn into the star of the college football ball.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll tell you this: after Jalen Hurts is gone after this season, watch out for Spencer Rattler. He's a true freshman right now. He's probably going to redshirt, but next year that's going to be a household name, and people are going to know him all across the country.
Yeah, I know he was a top recruit there, dual threat kind of guy, but it'd be interesting. Houston's quarterback, to Eric King, says he's not transferring, but if he does, how could you not look into Lincoln Riley's system and say, hey, I can go there and bolster my opportunity to play in the pros and probably win a Heisman at the same
yeah,
time.
I mean, that's definitely not out of the question.
Yeah, but no, Spencer Rattler, that's a good name for the future. I'll mark it down here.
Oh, yeah, remember that one. But that's kind of my bold prediction is that Spencer Rattler is going to be a household name in the future. Do you have any bold predictions for me moving forward?
For the rest of this season, I actually do. I'm starting to buy into the LSU hype. I'm not necessarily thinking that they're going to cover that 13.5-point spread there against Florida this weekend, and that's more due to the respect I have for Florida and their defense. But I think as much talk as Bama's offense is getting, that game this year between LSU and Bama, I know it's in November, early November. I don't have the date in front of me, but that game, if LSU wins it, which I think they will, in a shootout, that is, I think LSU is going to run the table there and be number one here in the SEC and go to the SEC championship, win it, and we'll see what they do in the playoffs. But right now, my bold prediction is the team in the SEC is actually LSU as opposed to Alabama.
Wow, I really like that pick. And if that's the case, if what you said comes true, I think you could actually see Joe Burrow win the Heisman. Because I mean, I think that he's going to have more opportunities than Jalen Hurts to make a case for himself to win the Heisman.
Oh yeah,
and, you beat Florida, you beat Alabama, and possibly beat Georgia in the SEC championship. My goodness. In that scenario,
be hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, in that scenario, you would have to give it to Joe Burrow. I mean, but I think that him and Jalen Hurts will both be there in the end in New York, and it could come down to one of those two.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, we've talked about it already, just how exciting the rest of this, mainly this weekend, is. I'm antsy because I can't wait to see what happens. It's all going to play out in the wash, but a lot of it's shaking out this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, a lot of what we're saying could end up becoming completely false. I mean, I was talking about Jalen Hurts. I mean, they could very well go out this weekend and lose to Texas. And I mean, LSU could, struggle against Florida, as they actually haven't faced a top 100 defense this season. So that's going to be a fun matchup for Florida's defense against LSU's offense. And we'll kind of see how that one shakes out. But yeah, man, I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be awesome.
Yes, it always is. And this season's starting to really, we're into the meat of it. We're ready to find out who's a pretender, who's a contender.
Exactly. Well, Alex, that's pretty much all I have for you. But man, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And if you want to, you can tell everybody where they can find you and find your podcast, and that way they can check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a great time talking college football. Always down to come on and shoot the shit here with you. I love talking college football, watching college football, and you name it. But yeah, me and my buddy Scott actually have a podcast called the Sports Bar Podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. All the normal suspects there for finding things on your own time. And
right.
Our whole main thing is every episode we sit down, grab a couple beers, put a microphone in front of us, and talk sports. And we like to go around NFL and college football and just cover all the hot topics.
Yeah, that was what I enjoyed that about your podcast. It's it's very it's not one dimensional. Like you guys talk about a lot of different topics and a lot of hot topics in the country and in the sports world, and I really enjoy it, and I enjoy yours and Scott's insight to everything, and I'm definitely going to be checking more episodes out too.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you listening, and I've been a listener of yours now a couple of weeks as we followed each other and connected on Twitter, and I've really enjoyed the content here, so always happy to help out.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I'd love to have you on again in the future.
Okay, great. Well, good luck to your Gators this weekend.
All right, thanks. And that was Alex Turko from the Sports Bar Podcast joining me here on Section 111. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tyler Shoemaker as he gives us his top plays going into Week 7 of the college football betting world.
So Week 7, I'm giving out 7 total plays. First, we'll go with Coastal Carolina -5 at home against Georgia State. My number on this game is Coastal Carolina by 9. So we're getting 4 points of value there. And the ATS point differential per game for these two teams favors Coastal Carolina by 3.9 points. So again, a lot of value there as far as how these teams have performed against the spread this year. Number 6, I've got the Florida Gators once again on the road in Death Valley at LSU. Florida catching 13.5 points right now. My number on this game is about 7.5. So we're getting a ton of value there. Public is, I think overvaluing LSU at home in a night game, even though that is a tough place to play. Up next, we're going with Oregon State at home, catching 14.5 points against Utah. My number on this game is about 12. So we're getting 2.5 points of line value there. And Oregon State's been much better against the spread this year by 6.7 points per game. Up next, Ball State. This game opened at Ball State -1. It is now Ball State +1. So we're getting some value there just in the line move. And I actually have Ball State winning this by about 1.5. And Ball State has been much better against the spread this year with an average ATS margin of 13.9 points per game. Up next, Iowa State on the road in Morgantown at WVU. Iowa State -10.5. My number on this game is about 15. So again, about 4.5 points of line value there. And Iowa State with a 5.4 point per game ATS differential here. And next, Florida Atlantic at home, laying 10.5 against Middle Tennessee State. My number on this game is about 15, so quite a bit of line value there. And Florida Atlantic's been a little bit better against the spread this year with a 2.6 point per game ATS differential. And for my last play, top play this week, going again with the Rainbow Warriors of Hawaii on the road at Boise State, catching 12.5. My number on this game is about 10, and Hawaii comes in with a 9.9 ATS point differential over Boise State. So that's the top 7 for this week. Also got, as we record this on Thursday night, I've also got NC State -4.5 against Syracuse, just for record-keeping purposes.
And that was Tyler Shoemaker with his top plays heading into week 7 of the college football betting world. I'd like to thank him and Alex for coming on with me. And, that's going to wrap it up for this episode, but we'll be back next week. And I truly appreciate you all tuning in to each and every episode. And I hope you continue doing so. But as always, I hope that you all learned something, and I hope that you gain some new perspective. And most importantly, I hope you all were entertained. But thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Section 111 podcast.